Hello, it's Etan. I'm here at Hollyhock House in Barnsdall Art Park. We're on top of a giant hill that used to be covered in olive trees. Very biblical, no? This was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, the Moses of the architectural world, leading us to the promised land of good design. This was his first commission in LA, and it's all thanks to Aline Barnsdall, who's an oil heiress. She was a patron of the arts and a philanthropist who envisioned a sprawling complex dedicated to avant-garde theater. So in addition to the house, there were going to be guest houses, studio space for artists, a kindergarten, a amphitheater, a cinema, the whole shebang. Only the main house and the two guest houses were ever built. One of those guest houses was demolished in the 1950s, and yet even if it didn't turn out quite as Wright and Barnsdall had planned, Hollyhock House is still one of LA's architectural marvels and a really important house in the history of Frank Lloyd Wright. Let's check it out. Frank Lloyd Wright became famous for his prairie-style houses in Illinois and Wisconsin, low horizontal buildings with free-flowing floor plans inspired by the flatness of the Midwest. You see vestiges of that style at Hollyhock House, but Wright had a philosophy that a building ought to be rooted in its setting. He called it organic architecture. For sunny Southern California, that meant building a house that's as much outside as it is inside. So you've got courtyards, terraces, folding doors, sleeping porches, all emphasizing that connection between in and out. Wright even designed a water feature that flowed from an outdoor pool to this little moat in front of the fireplace, which never worked properly, but he'd revisit the idea at his most famous house, Fallingwater. In 1920s LA, there were a ton of red tile roof houses evoking our Spanish colonial past. At Hollyhock House, Wright looked back even further to the architecture of the ancient Mayans. Those steep outside walls and these elaborate concrete ornaments, they look a lot like the temples of the Yucatan. That pattern, by the way, is a stylized hollyhock, Aline Barnsdall's favorite flower. You'll see variations of it on rugs, lighting fixtures, art glass, even the back of this chair. That's organic architecture too, individual parts building up to a coherent whole. Hollyhock House was built between 1919 and 1921, at a time when Wright was preoccupied with building the epic Imperial Hotel in Tokyo. So the job of supervising construction was left to his son, Lloyd Wright, then his assistant, Rudolf Schindler, both of whom left their mark on Hollyhock in numerous ways. These cool door handles are Schindler's, and Lloyd Wright made this table in the 40s out of a partition Schindler had installed in the 20s. Later on, Richard Neutra even helped out. That's 4 architecture legends working on the same property. Mind-boggling. Frank Lloyd Wright and Aline Barnsdall respected each other immensely, but they didn't always see eye to eye, and costs kept ballooning. So in 1921, Wright left the project, and Barnsdall halted further construction on Olive Hill. She was disappointed with the house. The roof leaked, and the front doors were too hard to open, so she donated it to LA. The city has owned Hollyhock House and the top of the hill since 1927. It was only after Barnsdall's death in the mid-40s that this park started to live up to her vision for it. There's now an art gallery, a theater, and an arts center for kids. The house itself has undergone extensive restorations. Next up is the 1921 guest house called Residence A. Here's hoping we can poke around in there within a couple years. Hollyhock House is still a thriving cultural center. They put on art exhibits and other kind of cultural happenings here. There are wine tastings on the lawn. And it's not for nothing that this is the only Frank Lloyd Wright building in Los Angeles that you can actually tour. I'd like to think that Aline Barnsdall would be really stoked that her house is still being used to foster an appreciation of art and architecture over 100 years after it was built. Thanks for doing LA with me.